So tonight's class is Le'ilei Nishmas in the memory of Yitzchak Tzvi ben Yosef. His neshama should have an elevation in Gan Eden. When's your husband's yard? Next week. Okay. So the neshama should also have an elevation. Meir ben. Amen. Amen. Okay. So we're going to start a 4-week series taking the idea of me and the Bible, which has been absolutely a fascinating journey to find relevance not just from the text and from the stories, but trying to understand how the biblical characters are relevant for us. And we'll get back to, we didn't do Aaron yet, there's still more to do, but we're going to take a break for a few weeks, especially because the Torah reading the next few weeks is about the building of the Mishkan, then we go to the offerings in Vayikra. So we're going to spend the next 4 weeks from now until Purim discussing 4 of the main characters in the story of Purim: Vashti, next we'll do Achashverosh, then Mordechai and Esther, and get to understand how their life stories actually also has many beautiful lessons and inspiration and thoughts that we can take for us in our lives, right? Should I crack a really corny joke? Really? It was like corny. It's almost like I feel almost embarrassed that I even say it. But I don't have a better one, so oopsies. First, hello to everyone that's watching. Ira, good evening. Andrew, good evening. I'm glad you're watching. I'm glad you're with us. Okay, so here's the corny joke, shall we? Knock knock. You know the knock knock jokes? I have little boys that love these kind of jokes. Who's there? Vashti. Vashti who? Vashti dishes, and I'll give you a Hamantash. Yeah. Not to my standards, but it's okay. You guys are a good crowd, so. Okay, anyway, so let's start with the story of Vashti. I am sure that I'm going to say many things tonight that no one in this room knows about Vashti. Fascinating, just knowing her life story. Now, we all know Vashti, the wicked queen that didn't listen, that they got killed by Achashverosh, she hated the Jews. Today, there's she has a life story to her. She has a background, she has a childhood and all that. She was, yes, we are told, the Talmud tells us that Vashti was one of the 4 most beautiful women who lived in the world. So she was, even though we always talk about how Esther was so beautiful, Vashti was an absolutely stunning, beautiful woman. But to appreciate Vashti, and also to appreciate in general the story of Purim, because many people know the story of Purim in a bubble. In a bubble means, we all know the story of Purim more or less, right? Who wanted to kill the Jews, and Mordechai, it's going to Esther. But when in history did it happen? What's the context? At what point in the story of Jewish history does the story of Purim take place? When you understand the historical context, you'll understand Vashti, you'll understand Mordechai, you'll understand the whole story in a whole better light. So we're going to go back to the year 443 BCE. 443 BCE is the year when Nebuchadnezzar becomes the king of Babylonia. So you've heard of Nebuchadnezzar. Why have you heard of Nebuchadnezzar? That's correct. Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Babylon, of Bavel, who is the one that destroys the first Beis Hamikdash. In the year 443 is when he became the king. And when he became the king, he actually conquered the land of Israel and put his own governor in charge, Yoachin. And shortly after he conquered the land, the Jews rebelled against the Babylonians, and they regained their independence from Babylonia. In 435 BCE, so 2 years later, he brings in another army. This is the story over and over, but you'll understand why it's important in a second. He brings in an army, and he actually permanently conquers the land of Israel to be under Babylonian control. And in 435 BCE, when he finally not 2 years later, 13 years later, 12 years, he reclaims it, he brings a whole group the first group of exiles, of slaves that were taken from Israel to Babylonia, including Daniel, right? We know the story of Daniel the lion's den. He was one of those first group of captives that was taken from Israel to Babylonia, the leaders of the Jewish people, Mordechai, and the others who were taken from Israel in the first group of exiles. The year 423, which is now 11 years after that is the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And that's the total destruction of the land of Israel. Although some Jews do remain in Israel under a new governor called Gedaliah, the vast majority of Jews are killed or taken into exile, etc. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is eventually taken over by a man called Belshazzar. Okay? Belshazzar is the emperor of the Babylonian Empire. This is about 45 years after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. 45 years later. Jews are living in Babylonia. They've already established themselves. Now Belshazzar has a little daughter whose name is Vashti. We're going to be talking about her. Okay? Vashti is the daughter of Belshazzar, the emperor of Babylonia. One night, Belshazzar throws an amazing party. A massive party. Now you have all heard about this party because it's at this party when a hand suddenly appears and begins to write words on the wall that no one knows what they mean. Right? You remember hearing about Daniel and the expression, the writing on the wall? You know where that right expression comes from? So I should maybe go into the story. It's another story. But basically, Belshazzar, the king of Babylonia, throws a big party. What's the party for? In his mind, I forgot one important point. Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah the prophet, prophesies to the Jews in the year 443 when Nebuchadnezzar became king. He made a prophecy. The prophecy was that the Jewish people would eventually be conquered by the Babylonians. The land will become desolate and barren. But after 70 years, the Jewish people will return back to the land of Israel. This was a prophecy already from then, from the time when Nebuchadnezzar became the king of Babel. Oh, well, listen. Now, all of the non-Jews knew that Jeremiah had prophesied that the exile of the Jewish people would only last 70 years. And there was a fear, it's an amazing thing, that the non-Jewish nations knew the power of the Jewish prophets, and they were petrified about the fulfillment of this prophecy of Jeremiah of the Jews going back to Israel after 70 years. So Belshazzar makes a big mistake. He begins to make the calculation of 70 years from when the prophecy had been first said, and then it was written down and sent when Nebuchadnezzar first conquered the land of Israel, which was in the year 443. So he had conquered the land of Israel the first time, and that was when he had written this prophecy. So he thought that the prophecy of Yirmiyahu, that 70 years later the Jews will go back to the land of Israel, was 70 years from when he had said the prophecy, which was now 70 years had passed. The 70th year from the time that Jeremiah had said this prophecy at the beginning of the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar, to Belshazzar, this meant that the Jewish prophecy was no longer true. It meant that Jeremiah was not the real deal. It wasn't accurate, and that once the 70-year mark had passed and the Jews hadn't been saved, he's good to go. And Belshazzar makes a party in which he wears the clothes. He gets dressed up. You know what he dresses up in? The clothing of the Kohen Gadol. They had conquered the temple. And he puts on the breastplate and the robe and the tzit, all the things from the Kohen Gadol. He's wearing the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. And on the tables was all the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash. He puts out a party. He puts out all of the vessels, and he puts out them in different candelabras, different beautiful objects that were taken from the Beis HaMikdash, which was a beautiful building built by Shlomo HaMelech. Well, they conquered the land, of course. He was a kid. Nebuchadnezzar, who was the father of the grandfather, he conquered it, and there was, Babylonian control. Again, this is 45 years after the actual destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So they had, and a lot of it was sitting in their storage, in their, in their secret chambers. And he had been afraid to use it. All the gold goblets of the Beis HaMikdash and all that they used for the vessels and for the offerings, for the gold, for the blood, all these vessels, they have been hidden away. Belshazzar had been afraid to show them. Now that he felt confident that the Jews would remain his slaves forever, he goes out to celebrate a massive party with all the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash put out on display for everyone to see, wearing the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. At that party, while he's sitting in the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, a hand suddenly appears on the wall. I should actually read through the whole story. Remember the detail now. Hand appears on the wall and begins to write words. I don't remember by heart, but I'll take a second. It's mem nun nun mem many farsi. Very good. Yeah, exactly right. Mani mani takli farsi, which is a code, and no one knows what it means. No one knows what it means. And then, how did you remember that? That's pretty good.
I remember strange things.
And anyway, no one, and they get very scared. At the party, they get very, very scared. They don't know what it means. And then Daniel comes, and he interprets this handwriting on the wall, and the last letter of each word, forgot the code, there's a code, the last letter of the word, that something 70 years, I don't remember again. I wasn't planning on going so deep into the story, but I see no one gave me blank looks for the writing on the wall. I'll find it in a second, whatever. But the point, Hashem wrote on the wall that a warning that the end of their time had come. So, which website you go to? Here. That's not it. Whatever. So he sees this writing on the wall. Daniel and tells them that this is going to be the last night of your kingdom, and the rest is going to be destroyed. And and that night, anyways, let's go further. That night, there was a plan by the Median Empire to conquer the Babylonian Empire. And they had, I'm actually really curious now to find this. Scrolling through, whatever. Find it for you after the class. So, we'll go back to Facebook here. So anyway, so basically, he that night there was a plan, and the Median Empire, led by Darius, the Median, comes with an army to attack Belshazzar. They had a secret agent inside Belshazzar's palace, and during the party that night, Belshazzar realized what's going on. He put in notice to be able to get in, to lock down the palace. There was one of his servants climbed up onto the roof where the chandelier was right over his head, and chopped down the chandelier, and the chandelier fell on top of him and killed him. His brain splattered everywhere, the chandelier fell on top of him. At that moment is when the armies invaded, and that night Darius' army came and they killed every single person in the palace of Belshazzar. During the whole commotion, as people are being killed in the palace, this little girl, Vashti, she's a young little girl. She hears the commotion, she hears people being killed, doesn't know what's going on. She runs out of her room and she runs into the banquet hall where she sees sitting on her father's throne a man who she thinks is her father. Who is it really? Darius, the king of the Median Empire that had just that night conquered the land, invaded the palace. When he came into the palace, he sat down on the throne of Belshazzar. He pushed Belshazzar's bloody body off the throne, and he took the throne that night. She comes running in, crying, petrified, and she runs and she sits on the lap of Darius, thinking it's her father. Darius feels compassion for this little girl that came crying on his lap. So even though he killed every single person in the palace, because they didn't know who would be loyal, who was not, he allows Vashti to remain alive, and he adopts her, he takes care of her. And now there's two opinions of what happens next. Either he gives Vashti as a wife to his son Achashverosh, or, according to another opinion, Achashverosh was actually a stable boy, a steward working in the palace. And when the whole commotion happened, he's the one that then took Vashti after she went on his lap. She took him. He's the one, Achashverosh, the one that took this orphan girl and rescued her and saved her, and that's why she married him. Either way, what's clear from this story is that the night of the handwriting of the wall with Daniel, which was not the point of what I want to get into, but what we're dealing with was the night that her father, Belshazzar, was killed. She becomes an orphan. Her entire family, all of the servants, everyone that had taken care of her was all killed. Her royal dynasty now ended. Her empire, that she was a daughter of, had been destroyed. The Babylonian Empire would no longer exist after that night. And she became an orphan at the mercy of whoever it is that was going to take care of her. Okay? That's the story. Fascinating story. You didn't know that Vashti was an orphan girl whose father was killed by a whole coup that happened inside, where someone, from the outside and the inside the same night prepared that they had someone inside to have him killed, and then they came and they invaded the palace and they killed everyone and all that. That's how Vashti survives the destruction of the Babylonian Empire. By sitting on the lap of Darius, and either them being married off to his son, or being saved after she was saved, by being taken care of by Achashverosh, who took the opportunity. Achashverosh was a very, very aggressive, not aggressive, not the right word, a very aspiring, a very ambitious, thank you. Very ambitious. We can talk about Achashverosh next week, God willing. He sees the opportunity, he takes care of her, and eventually she becomes his wife. Now after Darius, the history I'm telling you is all important for Vashti, so it's still part of the story. After Darius Darius is a king, how long is a king for? 1 year. 1 year. He gets killed in battle. Kings didn't live very long back then. It was a pretty dangerous job to be king. I mean, it was good perks, but it was pretty dangerous. Good perks, but a dangerous job. So he got killed after 1 year. And then Cyrus, who was a Median, took over from Darius, etc. Now what happens? So Cyrus was a Persian. The Persians come in the war against the Medians, and the Persians now conquer the Medians. So we've gone from Belshazzar, who is the king of Babylonia, to being killed by Darius, who is of the Medians, and then who's then taken over by Cyrus, who is of the Persians. Anyway, Vashti is what unites the palace into the... Okay. Anyway, so that's how you have the Persian Median Empire that becomes combined together. Now, Cyrus, he's also afraid of the 70-year prophecy of Yirmiyahu, that the base of Israel is going to be rebuilt. And he makes a calculation that the 70s are going to be coming, because the calculation should be not from the first time that Nebuchadnezzar conquered the land of Israel, but 2 years later, when he actually, not when he became king, but 2 years later when he actually invaded. Right? So therefore he decides, instead of allowing the Jews to crush my empire, I'm going to give them permission to build the Beis Hamikdash, to build the temple. And this way, when they build the temple, they're going to have the temple, but under my kingdom. And then my kingdom won't have to be destroyed. And the prophecy of Jeremiah could also come true, and there won't be a problem. You understand? If I don't let them build the Beis Hamikdash, so for the prophecy to come true, my kingdom will have to be destroyed. So instead, since I think that the prophecy started when Nebuchadnezzar conquered Israel, not when he became king, and the prophecy had been said by Jeremiah, so to prevent that prophecy from causing my kingdom to be destroyed, I'm going to give the Jews permission to go build the Beis Hamikdash. People don't know this. So before Achashverosh became the king, Cyrus, the Median king, sent a group of Jews, including Mordechai and many other Jews, who went up to Israel and started to build the Beis Hamikdash. They brought offerings, and they started the process. That time, Achashverosh becomes the king. How does he become the king? He's married to Vashti. So she represents, she's a Chaldean. He brings in the Persian Empire, and he's able to combine the Persian Median Empire into one united empire. And the first thing that Vashti does as the queen is make sure her husband stops the building of the Beis Hamikdash. Now this is why this whole history is very important. To Vashti, she prided herself on being the great-granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. She was the great-granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar and the daughter of Belshazzar. Nebuchadnezzar had been the one who had destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. Belshazzar had been celebrating the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. She had been raised in a home of absolute pure hatred for the Jewish people. That was the upbringing that she had. Pure hatred for the Jews. We destroyed them. We're celebrating their destruction. We hate the Jews. They're evil. They're wicked. I don't explain to you what they were telling her in her home, but that was the home she grew up in. That was who her father was. That was not only her father. This was the pride of the family. That we are the ones that destroy the Jewish people. We destroy the Beis Hamikdash. This was their pride. To her, the fact that the kingdom was allowing the Beis Hamikdash to be rebuilt was the ultimate slap in the face to the legacy of her family. To her grandfather, to her father. And therefore, the first thing she says, is you cannot build a Beis Hamikdash.
So, Rabbi, why did he put the clothes of the Kohen Gadol and put all the Beit HaMikdash things on the table?
Because one of his greatest life's accomplishments was the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash.
But he's admiring it if he's doing what he did.
Yeah, he was very proud of destroying the Beis Hamikdash. Belshazzar made a feast with all the clothing of the Kohen Gadol and all the vessels to show off. Look at the Jews, they're destroyed. We're celebrating their destruction. Like Titus made the big ark of Titus. Good evening, everyone that's watching online. Good evening, Gail. Good evening, Stephanie. Okay, so far we get the story. In fact, I saw an interesting commentary that when Achashverosh tells Esther that you can have half the kingdom, right? Up to half the kingdom will be yours. Why does he have to half the kingdom? Do whatever you want. Who says to the wife, you have to half of what I have? You ever tell your wife, you're trying to be on the good side? You say, sweetie, whatever you want, it's yours, right? You say it anyway. I don't think you mean it, but at least you say it. Achashverosh, up to half you can have. Don't even ask for the whole thing, you're not going to get it. Like, what? Why is he saying up to half you can get? Commentators are saying that you can ask for up to half. Israel, the Beis Hamikdash, don't even ask for it to be rebuilt. I'm not allowed to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. Achashverosh hated the Jews as much as Vashti did. But up to half of the kingdom you can have. Beis Hamikdash, that's it's a fascinating thing how much the non-Jewish kings were afraid of the Jewish people. And I have more to tell you next week for Achashverosh about how he was also afraid of the Jews. But next week, yeah.
But so the same people that hated the Jews also believed in the prophet.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. You're making an excellent point. The same kings that hated the Jews are afraid of what the Jewish prophet said. Their hatred for the Jews was because they recognized the power of the Jews. If you're nobody, then I'm not afraid of you. I don't. You hate? You can only hate something that you recognize. Maybe subconsciously. It's another discussion about Haman and Achashverosh. We're talking about the anti-Semitism course recently. But yeah, they recognize the power of the Jews, and that's why they were always afraid. Next week, when Achashverosh, he was also very afraid of the Jews. A lot of it, we're going to talk about his insecurities with the Jews. We're going to talk about the next week's class, his insecurity. But the point is that yes, they hated the Jews, and therefore the greatest party Belshazzar made was for the destruction of the Jewish people. Wait till the Vashti's party coming up in 1 minute. Anyway, so this is the first thing that Vashti does as queen, is ensure the stop of the building of the Beis Hamikdash, and that whatever Jews have been allowed to go to Israel were forced back into exile in Babylon. So Mordechai and the Jews that had gone to Israel were brought back into exile. And once again, the land of Israel is left completely empty and desolate and in a state of ruin. Now, this is where the Megillah starts. So everything I told you is background knowledge. That's fascinating. First of all, the fascinating story about Vashti is a girl, but also it gives you clarity in who is Vashti, who's Achashverosh. And now I'm going to give you more information, more context. It says the Megillah, Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, right? And it was, in the days of Achashverosh, he is the king that ruled from Hodu to Cush. Bishnas, second verse. In the third year of his king, Bishnas Shalosh, L'malcha Asam Mishteh, he made a big party. In the third year of his reign, he made a big party. Why? 180 days, and the whole story of the party, and how he had the carpets and the clothes, the drapes and the velvet and the silk and the thing and all the wine. And there was an abundance of wine flowing. 180-day party. What was the party for? Okay, so there's many things in sense. Remember I told you about the 70 years? Yeah. Okay, so he made a calculation that when was the 70 years of the prophecy of Yirmiyahu? Not from the prophecy had been said by Jeremiah, not 2 years later when Nebuchadnezzar had conquered the land of Israel the first time, but from 18 years later when Nebuchadnezzar had conquered the second time in the year 435 BCE, when the Jewish people have been taken as exiles. If you remember, I told you earlier, he conquered the first time, then he lost it, then he conquered it a second time, and at that time, a large group of exiles were taken into captivity, including Daniel and all that. So he starts counting, Achashverosh starts counting 70 years from when the first exiles of Israel were taken out of Israel and brought into Babylonia as slaves in captivity. So the 70th year of when the Jewish people have been conquered by Nebuchadnezzar and they have been taken as slaves out of the land of Israel, where the land began to be considered desolate, is the third year of Achashverosh's reign. And that entire year, Achashverosh is petrified. Because he had stopped the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, because his wife had insisted. And he was afraid that Hashem was going to take away his kingdom and to build a Beis HaMikdash. So what does he do? He decides to throw a big party. And that year comes. It's the year of the 70-year mark. And he realizes the only way to get the people to make sure Hashem does not show favor on the Jews, to make them have the Beis HaMikdash be rebuilt, is to make them sin. Right? You heard of that theory? It works. Hashem only going to give us our Beis HaMikdash if we're worthy, if we're deserving. At least then, the revenge will come anyway, but you have to be deserving. And so, Achashverosh is in order to ensure that this 70th year will pass and that the Jews will not get the Beis HaMikdash rebuilt, I have to make sure they sin. So what does he do? He makes a party and he invites all the Jews. And all the Jews felt, we have to go to the party of the king. How can we not go to the party of the king? The Jews were very politically connected at the time of Purim. Even before, besides for Esther, even before Esther. The Jews, Daniel. See, we think about Mordechai and Esther, connection to Mordechai and Esther. If you go back now in the history, just a few years, Daniel is the most respected advisor in the entire Median Empire. He was the only one that interpreted the writing of the wall, just like, I don't know exactly, 15 years before, 18 years before. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These were very, very famous prophets. Daniel was in the lion's den. They had tried, the other ministers of the king were very jealous, tried to have him killed. So the Jews were recognized, you understand, the fact that a nation of slaves became, when they were taken into captivity, another story, I'm getting distracted, but Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were taken into captivity for the sake of being advisors to the king. So, talking about they hated the Jews, they conquered the Jews, at the same time they recognized the brilliance of the Jewish people. So the Jews were very politically connected before Mordechai and before Esther. And the Jews felt that the only way for us to protect ourselves is to be, we got to go to the party, we got to be politically connected, and we need to show our faces, etc., etc.
Fasting, right?
What?
That's why we fasted, because they went to the party.
No, we're fasting because Esther fasted before she went to see Achashverosh. So they go to the party, and there is a party for the man with non-kosher food and non-kosher wine and the woman, all that. Says the Megillah, Gam Vashti HaMalka Asasa Mishtei Nashim. Also Vashti the queen, should actually prepare this text just to see about it, you'll believe me. It says Gam Vashti HaMalka, also Vashti the queen. She made a party for the woman, Beis HaMalchus, next to the house of the king, for the woman. So there is a male party going on in the Chatzar Ginat Mis in the Melech, in the courtyard of the king, a big, massive party going on. There was a massive festival for the men. And Vashti makes a separate party for the woman. But where does she make it? Not in a separate place for the woman. She makes it in the king's palace next to the men, because she wants to corrupt the men and the women. Everyone should, should end with a lot of worse than just eating non-kosher meat and drinking non-kosher wine. She also, she did many things to make it as a woman's party. There was a special kind of delicacy food. The men like, meat and wine. She had fancy food. She had art and all these different things. Now, we also know other stories about Vashti. I'll go back to the party in a minute. How she hated Jewish people so much, she would do everything she could to make the Jewish girls suffer. Her maids were Jewish maids. She deliberately would find Jewish maids to serve her in the palace. And she would make them work on Shabbos. The Gemara says that when she would make them, why did she get punished? She got killed on the Shabbos. The seventh day of the party, I'm going to get soon to when she gets killed, when the king wants her to come dance, is on Shabbos. Why is she killed on Shabbos? God punishes measure for measure. She used to make the Jewish woman work for her on Shabbos. Not only that, says the Talmud, when the girls would come to work for her, she would make them take their clothing off to work for her. What does it mean to take her clothing off? You could just say take off her Shabbos clothing. But simple reading of the words means she made them serve her in her house naked. She would strip them naked to go clean her house, to go serve her, to do whatever they had to do. Anything she could to degrade and to humiliate the Jewish girls, she did. A comparison to that would be the Holocaust, and the Nazis would make the Nazis would make the Jewish girls get naked and shave in and dance before them and have sport and fun with the Jewish girls. It's exactly what Vashti did with the Jewish girls. On Shabbos was her day of sport with the Jewish girls, which is why she ends up being killed on the Shabbos, the way she would make the Jewish girls work for her naked on Shabbos. So Vashti has another plan. Vashti knows, it's a fascinating from an Ein Yaakov. I remember where. Vashti knows that in all of Jewish history, who usually fell for sin? By the golden calf. We just talked about the golden calf. Who's with the golden? The men. That's why the men lost their jewelry. The women didn't sin with the jewelry. They kept their head on straight. By the sin of the spies. In the story of the spies, right? Where the spies got a very negative report about the land of Israel. Who sins? The men. In fact, there's a very, very famous Kli Yakar that if Moshe would have sent female spies instead of male spies, they wouldn't have sinned. The whole sin, the whole story of the spies, where they lost faith in God and they became disillusioned and sad and were crying, it only happened because it was men, not women. The women, their faith would have been strong. Many times the men are the ones that sin, and the women, they keep their faith strong. So Vashti knows, very good. So my husband is making a party for the men to get them to sin. So the men will sin, but the women are going to remain strong. And as long as the women don't sin, the future of the Jewish people is still safe. I have to get the women to sin. And therefore, Gam Vashti Amalka, she also makes an additional party just for the woman to create seduction and temptation that will talk to a woman. Fine foods, not meat and wine, but fine foods. And special art and special pictures. Says that she took them on a tour of the bedroom of the king in the palace. Women want to see it. Everyone wants to see what's going on. What does the palace look like? Where's the shower? Where's it? So she took them on a tour. So here's the bed where he sleeps. Here's where I do this with him. Here's where I do that with him. And she was showing them different things in the bedroom from the private life in order to arouse them. Now when the men who are drunk in the outside, in the courtyard, will get excited, the woman will be also in the right frame of mind to have many sins happen between the men, Jewish men and Jewish women. That was her plan in this. Sounds like whatever. You're getting an idea who Vashti is, okay? Getting the idea. Now comes the next part of the story. Comes the seventh day. Now after the first party, 180 days, there's another party, just people of Shushan. 7 days, and the Megillah tells us it's on the seventh day. And on the seventh day, the king is drunk. And there's a debate happening between the different drunk ministers at this party, which nation has the most beautiful woman in the land. Yeah? Sounds like a nice drunk men conversation. Whose women are more pretty? And each is having a debate. And finally Achashverosh says, my wife, my vessel, he says. My vessel. Not even a woman. Not even, because it's all about physical beauty and physical. The vessel that I use is more beautiful than all of yours. She's a Chaldean. That was her original nationality. And you're going to see, she's more beautiful than all of you. You want to see her? She'll say, yes, I want to see her. But only wearing the crown. What does it mean wearing the crown? In the Megillah it says he told his wife, come down to the party wearing your crown. Meaning, wearing your crown. That's all. Just the crown. Just the crown. Nothing else. Nothing else. Birthday suit and the crown. And how should the Jewish girls work without the crown? Now, what happens at that time?
She said no.
She says no. Why does she say no?
So she was womanly.
Not because she was a feminist. Not because she was we'll talk about feminism with Esther. Not because she all of a sudden felt my body, my right. She had danced around naked many, many times. In fact, the Talmud tells us that both Achashverosh and Vashti were both promiscuous people, and they both led a very polygamous life, whatever. They both had a lot of fun outside of their marriage, both of them. It was, mutual. There was no sense, there was no pretending that we're, in this just for each other. It wasn't both. It was mutual. It's mutual, open. But yeah, it was, the king had his own fun, and she had her own fun. Hashem And by the way, she was the most beautiful woman in the world, I told you. One of the four most beautiful women ever. And she was indeed the most beautiful woman at that time. Hashem made it that a rash, tsaras, spread out on her body. And all of a sudden, she's going to go into this party, and she becomes ugly. She has tsaras, leprosy all over her body. Not only that, it says that the angel Gabriel came and put a tail on her behind. Tail, a growth, hair, whatever. It could be even, it's hard to know if an actual tail came out like a long, like a horse, but even hair, you know what I'm saying? All of a sudden, she's not the way she should be. So she sends a message to her father. Listen to this message. Here we're going to get to the crux at a moment of desperation what a person really feels comes out. At that moment, she says to Achashverosh, she sends a message, my father could drink for 1,000 men and not get drunk. You have one drink and you become crazy. She's comparing to Belshazzar. My father Belshazzar, he could drink and he never got drunk. And you have just a few drinks and already you're completely drunk, and therefore I will not come to you. Now you can imagine, that's what the Gemara, the Talmud Baba says. The Talmud Yerushalmi, in the Israeli Israeli version of the story that took place, they say a little different. She saw she wasn't beautiful, and first she said to him a message that if they're going to see how beautiful I am, they're going to want to sleep with me, they'll kill you. And if they don't think I'm beautiful, then you'll be embarrassed. And he wasn't convinced. And then she starts to get a little more. She says to him that you were my father's steward. You worked in the horse stables. That's why we said there's a version that he was worked in the stables. You worked in the stables, and you were accustomed to have like the people in the stables behave, the truck drivers, right? No, truck drivers are watching. It's not, it's a different lifestyle. So you were now that you become king, you're still acting like you're a truck driver, like you're still acting like you're in the stables, behaving in an immodest way with your wife. I mean, you don't make your wife go parade in front of other people just wearing her crown. And then a third message she sent to him, that my father wouldn't even judge his litigants. So when people came to him in court, they wouldn't come naked. Again, you're judging me in front of other people naked. My father would never do such a thing. The point is, what do we see from the message? When she says to him, that my father could drink without getting drunk, and you have a few drinks and you're drunk. My father wouldn't judge people naked, and that you are just a horse stable boy, and all that, and how do you have the right to come tell me that I should come dance naked in front of you? Here you come to discover what she really feels about her husband, which may even be true. In Vashti's mind, she had never lost the rights to the kingdom, even though she had become orphaned, even though her father had been killed, and the Babylonian Empire had been destroyed and conquered. In her mind, she was always destined to be in charge. She's a ruler. She lived in a time, but she felt that the fact that Achashverosh was a king was not because Achashverosh deserved to be the king. Achashverosh was a king because he was married to her. In her mind, Achashverosh's greatness was not because Achashverosh was great. The only reason why Achashverosh became the king was because he had married her. Either because he had been smart when she was a little girl and he saved her, so he took advantage of the king's daughter and he took her, or because Darius had given to his son. But either way, the only reason why they were able to combine the Median and the Persian Empire together was because of Vashti. And here she says in her mind, my father was a much greater man than Achashverosh. Really, I should be the ruler of Persia. I'm the one that should know. And in some way, she was ruling him. She was telling what to do. You're going to tell me to come do something for you, to come dance in front of you? Absolutely not. What?
Achashverosh's father was the guy that she set on his lap, right? So he's also not from the kingdom.
That's only according to one opinion. As I said, there's two opinions who Achashverosh is. So one that says that she went. So according to one version of the story, on the night of the Belshazzar being killed, she ran into her father's room, and she saw Darius sitting on the throne, and so she ran to Darius, thinking it was her father. According to another version, Achashverosh was a stable boy. He saw what was going on. He took her and he ran away. Either way, that's how he became the king. Even if it's because he married Belshazzar, he married his daughter. As far as she was concerned, Achashverosh is an idiot. He's a drunk, blithering fool, which we'll discover next week. He was, whatever.
Why she married him?
She didn't have a choice. She was married to a little girl. She didn't have a choice. That's what I'm saying to you. She was an orphan that was saved by him. Either way, he saved her on the night when her whole family, every single person in the palace was killed. The only survivor, the only living survivor from the palace on the night of Belshazzar's death is Vashti, as a little girl. And Achashverosh is for sure the one that saves her. Whether it's because Darius gave her to Achashverosh or because he took her out of the palace, either way, she's the only survivor. That's how they got married. But the point is, as far as she's concerned, he's an idiot. He has no claim to fame. I'm the smart one. I'm the great one. And, you belong to me. I shouldn't have to listen to you. So, when she says this, obviously Achashverosh gets very, very upset. Very upset. But now, he doesn't know what to do. What should he do? So he turns to the advisors for advice. And one young shnook advisor, his name is Memuchan. Memuchan is actually Haman, but that time he was a nobody. And he had actually had an axe to grind against Vashti. Why is Memuchan not like Vashti? I saw three explanations. Either because Vashti didn't invite his wife to the women's party, so he wanted to get back at her. Or because Vashti once slapped him in the face with her shoes. He was an advisor to the king. And she was the entitled queen. She held herself high. She was a sadistic and wicked and evil. And she, And so one time she got upset at Haman, for whatever, I don't tell you why. And she took off her shoes and she slapped him on both sides of the face with her shoe. You know what I'm saying? You know what kind of woman she is. Take off your shoe and slap a guy in the face. On both sides of the face. So that slap in the face stung really bad. You know what I'm saying? So this was his chance. And now when the king was drunk, he got revenge on her for having slapped him in the face with her shoes on both sides of his face. And the third reason given is because he wanted that his daughter should become the next king, the next queen. He had a very beautiful daughter. He was convinced that if Achashverosh kills Vashti, his daughter will become the next queen. Anyway, that is what happens. He says, how could you allow this to happen and show off, let this woman not listen to her husband in such a public way when everyone saw? You have to make sure people understand that you're in charge. Gets to his head, and he has her killed. According to one of the opinions, he even has her head beheaded and brought to Achashverosh on a plate during the party. That's how, again, it's a different culture back then. And then you know the end of the story, right? He wakes up the next morning with a big hangover, and no queen. He says, where's Vashti? They say, king, yesterday he said to kill her and chop her head off, right? And he's very, very sad. It says Hashem sent the angel to put the wrath inside him. And when Haman comes to try and suggest maybe he should marry his daughter, he got so angry at Haman. You were the one that suggested I should kill my wife, and now he actually wanted to kill the ministers. Eventually, he makes the beauty pageant, and Esther becomes the new queen. Okay. That we'll talk about Esther and her becoming the new queen, God willing, and the week we talk about Esther. Let's talk about now the personality we see from this one. Now, first of all, it's a fascinating story, right? Fascinating story. What strikes me most in the story of Vashti, what strikes me most is the sense of entitlement she has. Now, it's true she was a very talented woman. She was beautiful. She was born into royalty. She came from a illustrious lineage. Her father was Belshazzar, that's for sure. The one that was killed, but Belshazzar, from the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. So she's a pretty important person.
Blue blood.
She has, blue blood. But you know what it creates within her? A sense of it's owed to me. Entitlement. I deserve to be the next ruler of the Persian Median Empire. The fact that I have to have a husband who's etc., etc., it's beneath my dignity to have to allow anyone to see that I have to answer to him. Sense of entitlement. It's not just about listening to your husband. It's about the fact that the way she treated the Jewish girls, and her whole mentality was, it's mine. Her hatred for the Jews destroyed the Basic English, a sense of entitlement. And that's why it explains that what was the end of Vashti's life? in the end, for everything, what did she have from it? She was queen for 3 years, and after 3 years, she was killed. Her end was nothing. Achashverosh remained the king, but she was not the queen anymore. Her end was nothing, because entitlement usually ends up with nothing because there is no end to entitlement. When you feel entitled and you have this mentality that everyone owes to me and that I deserve it and it's my right and it's my you owe me, so then there's no end to what is entitled to me. And the more you want and you expect and you demand, eventually there'll come a point where there's no end to your demanding and your entitlement, that you become nothing, and that's how Vashti ended her life. So what causes a person to become entitled?
Insecure.
No. What causes an entitlement mentality in a person?
When someone is given everything on a silver platter.
When you're given everything on a silver platter, the way she was raised. Do you know that entitlement? What?
I said to him, show me one that been giving you on a silver platter.
No, he's right. He's right. Entitlement actually is very often created by the people that love us most. Entitlement is created by the people that are trying to protect their kids or protect their workers or protect someone else. And so if you look at, I was looking into this yesterday with the other rabbi I prepared this with, what creates an entitled person? The environment you grew up in, the way your parents treated you, whether adults always solved your problems for you, and how you are treated by authority figures. Meaning that if a person grew up, and unfortunately in America today, this is a major, major problem of epic proportions, where everything is given to the youth of today, because our parents love us. And some of the parents here, this generation that we want to give our kids everything that we didn't have. We want to give them the best. We don't want them to have to suffer or to have lack or want. And Baruch Hashem, we have the ability to give. Not to give, hold back. So what happens? We create a mentality in our children, just like Esther, just like Vashti had from Belshazzar, that everything I have belongs to me. I mean, it's not that I have an ability to earn something, I have to work for something. I'm entitled to it. It's owed to me. And creates a language, like you have in America, where it's all about my rights. Not about my obligations, not about my commitments, or what I need to do, but I've never had to figure anything out because my adults, my parents, whoever it is, they gave me everything. They problem solved for me. They begged me to eat, so whenever I didn't want food, they would go out of the way to create food that I wanted to eat. So what happens when you do that? Create a mentality that you have to provide food that I want. When a parent says, no matter, okay, you don't want this, okay, I'm going to get that. You create a mentality in the child's mind that I'm entitled to whatever I want. If I don't want it, I'm entitled to demand something else. That becomes an entitlement. If you think about the most famous statement that was ever said by a United States president, what's the most famous statement ever made by a president of the United States?
Kennedy, no?
Yeah, Kennedy. What did Kennedy say? Exactly. Thank you, Randy. The most famous statement ever said by a president is, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what your country can do for what you can do for your country. Right? How many presidential speeches have been about what your country will do for you? How many presidents spend the whole presidency and the whole time campaigning telling you what they're going to do for you and what their country can do for you? And we're going to give you healthcare. We're going to give you social security. We're going to give you Medicare. We're going to give you pre-K and childcare and paid leave and whatever. We're going to give you more and more and more entitlements. And yet the most famous, the most remembered words of any president were not words offering an entitlement, not words saying what I or what the country will do for you. It's about what you need to do for the country. Because to create an entitlement mentality, although it's very easy to do mistakenly, unknowingly, lovingly, is the exact opposite of the nature of a human being. It's the exact opposite of the nature of a human being. And in truth, it says, God created man to toil. Adam la'amal yuvad. Man was born to toil. Man was not born to receive for free. In fact, it's against human nature to take food for free. It says in the Talmud that there's bread of shame, which is bread that you get without working for it. A person doesn't want to take bread that's not theirs. Famous story of the Alter Rebbe, where someone came to the Alter Rebbe and was complaining. He had a whole list of problems that he had in his life. A whole list of problems. He needs a blessing for parnas. He needs a blessing for health. He needs a blessing for nachas. He needs a blessing for a whole list of things he needed blessings for. He finally finishes his whole list of things, all the things he needs a blessing for. He had a long list. And the Alter Rebbe tells him, you spent the whole time you're here telling me everything that you need, but you didn't yet once say what you're needed for. Yeah, you need God to do this. You need this from God. But what does God need you for? What are you needed for? That's why we were created. And there's a myth that exists in the modern day version of Judaism that some people have, that I did a good deed, so God owes me. Yeah, it's part of the American mentality that exists today. If I was a good person, so how could God, God owes me. How could God let something that I think is bad happen to me? If I was so kind, I was so good, I went to shul, I gave charity, it's owed to me. I deserve it. I'm entitled. This is, thank you, Larry. That is the mentality of Vashti. The mentality of Vashti is that I am entitled to all my greatness. The fact that I'm great, it's not because I was given the opportunity, someone saved my life, someone took care of me. The fact that Achashverosh saved Vashti's life didn't make Vashti appreciate Achashverosh. Of course, I'm entitled to have my life saved. And in fact, everything I have is mine. The fact that he's even the king is mine. Everything is mine. I deserve it. It's mine. It's owed to me. It belongs to me because that's how I was raised. That's how from the day I was a little girl, everything was given to me on the silver platter. She was a princess. And therefore, the fact that Achashverosh saved her life, or the fact that didn't mean anything to her. She was entitled. And we need to learn from Vashti and see what happened. What was the end of Vashti? The end of Vashti was nothing. Because there's no end to the danger of entitlement. Rather, what's it mean to be a Jew? A Jew means to work not because there's a reward. What does it say in Pirkei Avos? It's a very beautiful mission on Pirkei Avos. Ethics of our fathers. Don't be like servants who serve their master in order to receive a reward, right? Don't be like a Jew who goes to work, he clocks in at 8 o'clock in the morning at the minyan or on Shabbos or whatever to get his paycheck, to get a reward. Says the mission of Pirkei Avos. Rather, be like servants who serve not for the reward, but for the benefit of being able to say, I serve the king. If you're serving because I'm entitled and I want to get my fair due, and that's dangerous. To be a Jew means you don't serve God for a reward. We're not entitled to anything. We were created for the opportunity to serve, the opportunity to come close to Hashem. And that is how a Jew needs to go through life. Not like Vashti, entitled, which is a highly, highly dangerous way of living life. But rather, I don't look like too much into American culture today, even though it's a very, very important topic, but I don't want to go but rather we need to live life recognizing not what we want or what we need, but what we are needed for. Okay? That, my friend, is the story of Vashti.